to do some things differently than the way they do. Although it isn't to say that that's true of all these folks. But it isn't really their job. Their job, for the most part, is to put Part A into slot B, and put the square pegs in the square holes and the round pegs in the round holes.
So they play with financial Legos.
They do. They follow manuals. In the case of IRS agents, their Internal Revenue Manual, which is here's how you do everything, practically tells them how to blow their noses. It's a huge book that has a guideline, an instruction for every possible circumstance. And that doesn't get into, here's why you're doing all these things. It just says, do this, when this happens, do this. And most of them never see much further than their own little area of responsibility. So, it would be far too much to say that they've had any occasion or even any, opportunity to learn anything in any depth about what it is they're doing. They're just kind of following instructions. The same thing, unfortunately, is true of people in the private industry that are involved in this area. Bear in mind that the tax code alone, as I just explained, that's just a consolidation of the law. It's 3.5 million words. It's huge. It's huge. It's so huge that it isn't possible to actually read through the entire thing in a human lifetime in any meaningful way. But even if you attempted to do that, by the time you got through the first quarter of it, you wouldn't credibly remember what it is that you had started with, because it would be a year later, and and you'd have read 750,000 words to get to that point. So it just isn't that way.
A funny story I think you might actually enjoy. A friend of my wife's, he decided that he was going to go to law school, and he went to Georgetown, very, very esteemed law school. And his law class, I don't know what the exact name of it is, but the class that deals specifically with taxation was taught by the spouse of one of the U.S. Supreme Court justices.
Oh, no kidding.
And I had just read your book maybe 3, 4, 5 months before I was at this barbecue and he was there. And I asked him, I got into it with him, and I said, what's the deal here? What am I missing something? Is this guy wrong or what? And we started going over it. And you know what the core problem was? Why he disagreed with me and ultimately and with you was because when he went to school at Georgetown, they never even raised the issue of liability for the income tax. They never even touched on it. They start that class on day one with the assumption that everybody is liable. He had absolutely no information regarding liability.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, that is that's a very good descriptor of the circumstance that most people in the industries that deal with this, the H&R Block people, tax attorneys, CPAs, and so forth, as well as IRS personnel themselves. That's where they're confined to a certain context, and everything that they see about the subject makes that presumption that they're dealing with somebody about whom it's already been established that they are within the class of people. Their earnings are from taxable activities. That's taken for granted. That's the starting point, just as you said. Your correspondent was describing. And if you start there, then you have this enormous, complex, nuanced body of law that you have to deal with, and everything in it is appropriate to that individual or those activities that are being considered. But the fact is that there is another reality. There's another class. The bigger class are people whose activities are not of the taxable variety. And when you step outside of that, the first category, then you're in a different area entirely, where issues of we're back to first causes here, and now we have to determine whether or not this person actually did something that is taxable, and so it's a whole different reality. The people in that profession, they live in the one reality, and they don't even perceive the existence of the other kind, because it just isn't part of their day.
Well, we're gonna have to take a break, and I encourage everybody to stay with us, because Pete Hendrickson is here live with us today, actually telling us the fascinating truth about taxation in America. Stay with us. We'll see you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to Fighting Back. I am Dan Travis. Here with me today, Peter Hendrickson, author of Cracking the Code, The Fascinating Truth About Taxation in America. Pete, right before the break, we were talking about why people don't understand the law, even professionals, why they don't understand what the law actually says. And when I was reading your book, I read something, it just seemed so insidious to me that I had to check for myself because I couldn't believe you were right. I just couldn't. I couldn't believe that the government of the United States would really do what you were saying. Can you tell us about custom definitions?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad you checked, by the way. I want to say, Dan, nothing pleases me more than to have discovered that the general readership of Cracking the Code is a diligent crowd and a careful and somewhat cynical crowd. These folks don't take anyone's word for anything, and in a way, I encourage them to not do that. And what we're just about to talk about is one of the reasons why, and one of the best examples of why it's important to do your own looking. So I'm glad you went to the trouble of looking, and I always appreciate it when people do that. The law uses custom definitions. All law does, actually. It's not confined exclusively to income tax law. It's a standard thing. It's called words of art or terms of art. And what it means is that some expressions in a given body of law have special definitions provided for them. And when they do, they lose entirely the definition of what might be a completely common word that custom-defined term mimics. And in the tax law, that principle, that doctrine, that practice is broadly used, and it has a very important impact on the general misunderstanding of the law. In particular, I'm going to give you a few examples of some of these custom-defined terms, and you'll very easily see, I know you know, but your audience will very easily see why this will contribute so substantially to misunderstanding of the tax. Among the custom-defined terms in tax law are employee, wages, employer, employment, trade or business. Even income has its own custom definition, although in that particular case it isn't one that's actually formally described. It's one that has arisen through statutory construction over the course of the years. Taxpayer is itself a defined term in tax law. Because of these definitions, when someone is given an excerpt of the law by an IRS person, for instance, or get something in the mail from them or whatever, it will make references to things that all employees need to do, or reporting that needs to be made about all wages paid, or what somebody engaged in a trade or business is obliged to do under the tax law. And because the definitions of these terms are not provided, and in fact because these terms themselves are not described as being custom-defined terms in those excerpted portions of the law, the person getting them will presume that those things have their common meanings. They'll presume, this says I have to report something about my employees, and what that must mean, this is what goes through their head, is I have to report something about all the people who work for me. That's what's taken for granted. What isn't understood by that individual is that employees is, in fact, a custom-defined term in the law, and it doesn't mean all workers. It only means certain kinds of workers, workers that fall under certain categories, workers that are specified in the definition provided. And the odds are really, really good that particular reader, whoever it might be, his workers don't qualify under that definition. But he doesn't know that, and he doesn't know even that under our system of law in this country, it's his responsibility to learn whether there are custom definitions in those sections of law that he's been provided, that the friendly IRS guy has sent to him in the mail, making a claim on him. In fact, the very fact that the thing arrived in his mailbox will furnish support for the presumption, an inaccurate presumption, unfortunately, but furnish support for the presumption that whatever arrived applies to him and applies to the people who work for him. Because otherwise, why would it show up? I mean, why would you get it?
Right.
The Sears company doesn't send stuff to the people who are in management at Penny's. At least we don't think they do, anyway. And so, if you get something that speaks that way, you have to tell us this about all your employees,